Years before the battle between Aslan and the White Witch in the fictional kingdom of Narnia was penned, C.S. Lewis had explored the theme of good and evil in a thin volume of imaginative letters between two devils. Philosophical and diabolical, yet entertaining and easily readable by the masses, the Screwtape Letters challenge our preconceived notions of heaven and hell, good and evil, God and Satan. This timeless work remains one of the definitive literary classics of the 20th century. C.S. Lewis was not the first writer to explore the mysteries of the underworld. In the early 1300s, the Italian poet Dante wrote the Divine Comedy, which took its readers on a journey through hell, purgatory and paradise, and left us with the memorable line inscribed on the gates of hell, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." In 1667, epic English poet John Milton tackled the subject of Satan in Paradise Lost. His Satan uttered the noteworthy phrase that it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. These were certainly great literary works, but their length and numerous mythological references made them inaccessible to many modern readers.
Each of those classic works, Paradise Lost and the Divine Comedy, represent sort of long narrative epic poetry and place great demands on the reader, certainly the contemporary reader. Historical context, some theological sophistication, and so forth. So even though Lewis was familiar with those works, loved those works, and in some way derived the premises for Screwtape from those two works, he was interested in entertainment that had a spiritual impact. And so he wrote a much more compact dialogue that would be very accessible to readers of English texts. You don't have to study Italian to enjoy Screwtape, and you don't have to be a Milton expert to enjoy Screwtape.
It would take a man who was at one time a self-proclaimed atheist to produce a work that would personify Satan to a new era of readers. Clive Staples Lewis may have seemed like a strange choice to become the torchbearer for Christian apologetic writings in the 20th century. However, from a young age it was certain that Lewis would develop as a brilliant analytical thinker, a modern Renaissance man. He was born in 1898, the younger of two boys. His mother died when he was a young boy, and so he was raised by his father and sent away to boarding school. His childhood was filled with books, and he grew up with a love of literature, poetry, music, and languages. Both parents were descended from clergymen, and he was raised as a small child in the Church of Ireland, before drifting away from his faith after his mother's death. Upon reaching adulthood, Lewis enrolled at Oxford University, but his time there was cut short by the call to duty in World War I. He volunteered for military service, and by his 19th birthday was en route to battle in the trenches of northern France. His experiences there made a lasting impression, and one of the central themes of the Screwtape Letters is the effect of war on the human soul. Lewis was wounded in battle by an exploding shell the following year, and after receiving a medical discharge, he returned as a student to Oxford University. He graduated with honours and was elected to teach English at Magdalen College, Oxford, where he immersed himself in debates and conversations with his Christian friends, notably Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien. Over a period of several years, Lewis began to wrestle with the idea of Christianity. He was influenced by Tolkien and by the writings of G.K. Chesterton, and wrote in 1929 that he was the most dejected and reluctant convert in all England. Lewis wrote his first book, The Pilgrim's Regress, in 1933. More than 40 works followed, including the Screwtape Letters, which first appeared in London in an Anglican newspaper called The Guardian in 1942. The letters were collected and printed in book format and have enjoyed an immense popularity ever since. Perhaps Lewis himself was surprised at the success of the work. He admitted that while the writing process was easy, he did not enjoy producing the work, and that it even almost smothered him before he was done. The Screwtape Letters are a series of 31 epistles written by Screwtape, a senior devil, to his nephew, a junior tempter named Wormwood. The correspondence describes the efforts of Wormwood to seduce an ordinary young man in England to eternal damnation. Screwtape encourages the apprentice tempter to encourage corruption of every facet of the man's life, from his faith and love relationships, to his hobbies and pastimes, to even his patriotism in a time of war.
The Screwtape Letters is a collection of letters from a senior devil to a junior devil, from an uncle to a nephew, where Screwtape is instructing his nephew in the ways of tempting a believer, a man on a journey of faith who eventually becomes a believer. It's Lewis purports it to be received as sort of intercepted letters from the underworld, and it's an instructional manual on the ways of temptation.
In their quest to derail the young man from a holy life, the two devils are rather cunning, for they're not interested in finding the one perfect moment by which the young man will turn his back on his faith and his God. Rather, Screwtape and Wormwood seek to win over the man gradually by the persistent and systematic corruption of all that he enjoys and believes. The safest road to hell, Lewis writes, is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. And how did Lewis view hell and devils? As he explained in his 1961 preface to the expanded edition of the Screwtape Letters, Lewis compared hell to a bureaucracy, a lowerarchy as he calls it, where the greatest evil is conceived and ordered in clean, carpeted, warmed and well-lighted offices by quiet men in white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice. Throughout the centuries, artists and writers have portrayed Satan as a horned creature with goat-like hooves and beard holding a trident. It is believed that this depiction of Satan was based on Greek mythology and modelled after gods such as Pan and Dionysus. But there is also a connection to the idea of a horned god personified in characters such as the British Herne the Hunter and the Hindu Pahupati.
Satan, or devils, have often been depicted rather like gargoyles on Gothic cathedrals, ugly, and hell itself was always depicted as a kind of mouth into which sinners would be led. Satan was often with horns. So that in general, the depiction of Satan in the Middle Ages was gruesome and fearful. It was intended to evoke fear on the part of people, quite rightly. As time went on, we came into the Renaissance. Similarly, Satan would sometimes be depicted as a kind of snake. There's an extraordinary picture by Michelangelo, which shows Satan as a kind of snake with a human face. Sort of, Satan became a kind of Mephistopheles, as in the opera Faust, who would be dressed rather elegantly, with a sort of Robin Hood hat with a feather. Although I remember as a child looking at cans of deviled ham, and there would be a little devil on it who would have a tail and a pitchfork and horns, which was a sort of popular version of Satan. I think the accoutrements of the devil have tended to trivialize the notion of evil. And that is not a good thing. Because it does seem to me that evil is a reality and not simply a cartoon figure.
In recent times, this mythic image has morphed into a handsome young man with a goatee, suggesting Satan's charm and allure. Lewis, however, broke away from the traditional representations of Satan, envisioning him not as an impish figure with a red cape and pitchfork, but as a CEO, running a vast, multi-layered organization of chaos and evil. The image of the devil in literature and art has derived from legend and mythology. But what about the names of the evil one Lewis referred to as our Father below in the Screwtape Letters? The word Satan comes from the Hebrew and means accuser or adversary. Many other names have developed throughout the centuries. The name Lucifer comes from a combination of two Latin words, lux meaning light and ferro to bring, thus the denotation of Lucifer as a light bearer. The Bible refers to Lucifer in the Old Testament book of Isaiah.
How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? Isaiah 14:12.
Originally, it was assumed that this verse referred to a king of Babylon, most likely Nebuchadnezzar. However, some of the early church fathers, such as Tertullian, linked this text directly to Satan. As proof, he referenced quotations from the Gospel of Luke in which Satan falls as lightning from heaven, and from the book of Revelation, where Satan was similarly cast down after warring with a heavenly host of angels led by Michael the archangel.
The great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. The accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Revelation 12:9-10b.
St. Jerome shared this view and incorporated the interpretation of Lucifer as Satan into his 4th century Latin Vulgate. In the late 1500s, playwright Christopher Marlowe dramatized the idea of Lucifer as Satan in his great work Dr. Faustus, a play which would have been intimately known to C.S. Lewis as a scholar and teacher of Renaissance and Elizabethan literature. The story recalls the German myth of Faust, who sells his soul to the devil in exchange for power and knowledge. Another name for Satan is Beelzebub, inspired by the Canaanite god Baal. The Gospel writers refer to him when they describe an instance in which the Pharisees accuse Jesus of casting out demons in the name and power of the devil.
This fellow does not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils. Matthew 12:24.
Satan has many names, and in the Bible we also find he has several clandestine purposes. As his Hebrew name suggests, he is an accuser, a role clearly defined in the Old Testament book of Job, where Satan appears as a prosecutor-type figure, ready to indict a man the scriptures declare as righteous. And in the book of Zechariah, where Satan accuses the high priest Joshua of being clothed in filthy garments, implying that he was stained with sin. We also find Satan as an adversary, such as when he takes the form of a serpent in the Garden of Eden, and as we find in the book of 1 Chronicles, when Satan leads David to sin by taking a census of the nation of Israel.
Lewis was sitting in church one day and got preoccupied with this thinking about temptation he was hearing in the sermon. And he began to think, what would the opposite of this experience be like? What if we were listening in not to a sermon from an agent of God, but overhearing the conversation between a senior devil and his apprentice? And that was sort of the birth of Screwtape, the idea. Lewis is always interested in reversals, of taking our ordinary expectations about how we should think about Christianity and flipping them upside down. He shares that with people like G.K. Chesterton and even J.R. Tolkien, his close friend. And the point is that if we could overhear what our enemies say about us, in this case, demonic enemies, it would shock us into a realization that we're really in a spiritual battle.
Both the Screwtape Letters and the Bible portray Satan as an evil adversary. But is he the antithesis of God the Father, the enemy as Screwtape calls him? Not according to Lewis, who believed that God had no opposite. He believed that if you took away every good attribute of God, there would be nothing left to comprise a counterpart. Instead, Satan began as an angel who rebelled against God by his own choice and led a throng of followers to become the dark forces we call devils. The book of Revelation describes the war in heaven that led to Satan's fall.
And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. Revelation 12:7.
Satan, the leader of these fallen angels, is not the opposite of God, but rather of the archangel Michael, who leads the host of heaven.
Screwtape Letters reveals that the war is ongoing and it's daily, and it in some senses it's been settled and decided. The outcome, I think, has been made clear in scriptures as to who will be victorious. I think our Lord has won the battle, although Satan is not ready to give that battle up yet. And Satan, because he doesn't believe, of course, in the Lord and believe the truth, fights daily as if the outcome is still undetermined. I think it reveals the seriousness of it. I think the angels and the demons don't consider it to be a trifle in their lives. They're vigilant, and the angels are. I think Michael is vigilant and sort of defending God and protecting us, and the devil is equally vigilant and trying to lead us astray.
For centuries, there had been conflicting views on the origin and power of Satan. Manichaeanism is a belief dating back to the 3rd century that there are two supreme beings, a force of goodness and light that is God, and a force of evil and darkness that is the devil. According to this theory, each human has both forces within him, the spirit, which is light, and the body, which represents darkness. The Manichaeans believe that this dual nature is constantly at war, and when we succumb to evil, it is not of our own choosing, but rather the evil inside our body that overtakes us. The Church officially condemned their heretical views in 561 AD at the Council of Braga. The council decreed, "If anyone says that the devil was not first a good angel made by God, or that his nature was not the work of God, but claims that the devil sprang from the darkness and had no creator at all, rather that he is himself the beginning and substance of evil, let him be anathema." One of Manichaeism's most famous adherents was St. Augustine, who followed the group for over 8 years before experiencing a conversion to Christianity and denouncing the group he once considered as true. Interestingly, Lewis frequently cites Augustine as an influence on his philosophies and writings.
To speak of evil as a sort of opposite is to elevate evil to a kind of the level of divinity, and that was a very popular heresy. It appears from time to time in Manichaeanism, in Docetism, in Gnosticism, the Cathars in the Middle Ages. It's a temptation, because of the reality of evil, to suppose that evil is a kind of primary principle along with God or goodness.
The battle over the nature and creation of Satan continued, as some in the 12th and 13th centuries embraced among other beliefs a writing known as the Secret Supper, which spoke of John questioning Jesus about a variety of mysteries, including the origins of the world and the rebellion of Satan. This writing asserts that Satan created the world, and Adam and Eve were inhabited by the devil. The Church railed against such beliefs in the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, where they declared, "The devil and the other demons were created by God good according to their nature, but they made themselves evil by their own doing. As for man, his sin is at the prompting of the devil." As for Lewis, he held firmly to his belief that Satan was not the opposite of God, but of Michael, the archangel. He did admit, though, that his religion would not be in shambles if he was not correct on this point.
It seems to me that Lewis is perfectly right in saying this. It is not, at least for traditional Christianity, God is incomparable, and there is only one God.
Lewis, I think, was correct in saying that God has no opposite. God is an eternal being and infinitely powerful. There's no such being that would be his opposite on that level.
In popular view, Satan and God are sort of equal enemies of each other, and the fact is Satan's a created being. He's not omniscient, he's not omnipotent, he's not omnipresent. And God is all those things. And more than that, God is love and God is light, two attributes that Satan knows nothing about.
Even so, he knew that his opinion was of little consequence in how readers would receive his work. Some would view the Screwtape Letters as a literal description of hell and devils, while others would recognize its allegorical nature. Either view was acceptable, for the purpose of this diabolical conversation was not to indoctrinate its readers, but rather to stimulate a fascinating discourse on the sinful nature of man versus the redemptive nature of God. Did God give each person free will? Or are we just pawns in an age-old game, advanced through a series of carefully orchestrated moves in a future that has already been laid out for us? This conflict can be traced back to the very first humans, Adam and Eve. God created them and planted them in a lush paradise with everything they could ever desire: human and animal companionship, delicious food, meaningful work, and a life free of pain and death. There was just one condition. The couple could not eat the fruit of a certain tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For once they ate of its fruit, they would experience evil and shame and death. C.S. Lewis recognized the difficulty of this position, as he wrote in The Problem of Pain, "From the moment a creature becomes aware of God as God, and of itself as self, the terrible alternative of choosing God or self for the center is opened to it."
There is a tendency for, particularly in these days, for us to think of ourselves as determined. The determinism is pervasive in human behavior, that we are genetically programmed. And certainly there is the case to be made that genetics do have an extraordinary influence over our lives. But I really do believe, and I sometimes think it's a matter of faith rather than empirical verification, that we can choose to be good or evil. I don't think it's simply programmed in us. A great part of ourselves, of who we are, is genetic. But I think finally it comes to the point where we choose either for the good or the evil. So I think we are free. This is an attribute that we share with God.
So what or who would cause Adam and Eve to break the one rule that governed their happiness, to be forced to choose between God and self? It was none other than Satan, who appeared to Eve in the Garden of Eden as a talking serpent. He offered her this promise about the fruit of the tree of knowledge.
And the serpent said unto the woman, You shall not surely die. For God does know that in the day you eat of it, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Genesis 3:4 and 5.
In their desire for knowledge, Eve and then Adam ate of the fruit with disastrous consequences. According to the biblical account of this event in the book of Genesis, they experienced shame for the first time and were forced to sew fig leaves together to cover their nakedness. Eve and all her daughters were punished with the promise of painful childbirths. Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, and the plentiful ground was cursed. And most importantly, the first human couple and all their descendants would now experience death. According to the wisdom of Solomon in the Hebrew Apocrypha,
For God created man to be immortal, and made him to be an image of his own eternity. Nevertheless, through envy of the devil came death into the world, and they that do hold of his side do find it. Wisdom of Solomon 2:24.
Lewis believed in what John 7:17 teaches, that he who chooses to do the will of God will know if Jesus is his son and can be trusted. And so he depicts in his fiction, particularly in Screwtape, in the person of the patient, who's the human being who's being tempted, a will to do what's right. And so throughout the Screwtape Letters, the patient is tempted to divert from that path, but he always has a choice. And of course the devils are dismayed when he chooses, even when it's difficult, to obey, even when all around him would suggest he give in.
The Screwtape Letters present temptation as sometimes missable, sometimes not very visible in our lives. It's easy to overlook. I think what Wormwood and Screwtape are engaged in is just creating a series of frustrations and annoyances in our lives. And you see the patient in the Screwtape Letters struggling with rather mundane or sort of everyday situations that are really causes for temptation, and the outcome of that moment of decision will sort of direct the patient's path, either closer to the Lord or closer to the devils, or closer to the enemy in heaven from Screwtape's perspective. But temptation is presented as sometimes a very slight thing, a very subtle thing, and I think Lewis would like us to be aware that it's not often that a great force or great presence enters our life that's understandable as from the devil. It's the small things. It's the things that we would easily mistake as just minor challenges, and that encourages us sometimes, I think, to think that if it's a challenge, then it's a character building moment, and then we try to handle that sort of independent of the Lord because we feel like there's something there for us to maybe manage, and then we get led off on a path of us managing these series of temptations in life and never looking to the Lord for our source to get us through that.
In the New Testament, we learn that even devout Christians like the Apostle Paul experienced spiritual and emotional challenges. He writes of a time when he was afflicted with what he called a thorn in the flesh, and believed that a messenger from Satan was sent to torment him. Though it is not clear what the problem was, we do know that he asked for his trial to be removed. His prayer was not granted, as evidenced by the Lord's response. My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness.
Temptation in Screwtape is distortion, exaggeration, in short, lies that the enemy tells the believer so that either he will mistrust God or mistrust the image of God in himself. And as a result, what Lewis wants to depict in Screwtape is that little sins grow into big sins. And the resistance we apply at the onset of temptation pays off later when more momentous and more demanding challenges to our faith come along. My favorite line on in this regard from Lewis is, Screwtape says, "Why use adultery when golf will do?"
While Screwtape admits that humans are easily tempted in difficult times, he also acknowledges that trials can deepen a person's relationship with God. He writes in one letter that it is dangerous to the cause of a person's damnation when they feel forsaken and still remain obedient to God's will. Nowhere is this obedience to the Father truer than in the Passion of Jesus Christ. The Bible records the agonizing prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane prior to his betrayal and arrest.
"Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Not as I will, but as you will." Matthew 26:39.
The cup, however, did not pass from him, and Jesus endured physical and emotional torment before and during his crucifixion. One of the last words spoken from the cross revealed the depth of his anguish.
"And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46.
Jesus was actually quoting Psalm 22, an Old Testament prophecy of the events surrounding his suffering and death. His words were not an expression of doubt or hopelessness, but instead a cry of pain stemming from his separation from the Father and the crushing weight of the world's sin upon him. The words reveal the depth of his love and obedience to the Father, the choosing of God and divine will over self. The Screwtape Letters explore the battle of good versus evil and the struggle of man to embrace God's will rather than his own selfish desires. Early in the letters, the apprentice tempter, Wormwood, informs his uncle that the young man, the patient as the devils call him, has become a Christian. The apprentice is concerned, but his more experienced mentor puts his mind at ease by teaching him that many people are recovered from the enemy's camp, for religion can be twisted into self-righteousness, and sincere spirituality can become false spirituality. Screwtape confides to the tempter that one of his greatest friends is the church itself, not the mighty universal church that has spanned the centuries and brought millions into its fold, but rather the local church, oblivious of the depth and might of its history, and rich with a congregation of ordinary sinners and hypocrites. This church becomes a breeding ground for disillusionment and apathy. From there, the young man will easily be led astray, as his prayers will become parrot-like and self-centered. He will become distracted easily. In fact, he could just as easily open a good book as spend time studying the scriptures. His sense of false spirituality grows, and the situation looks promising for Wormwood.
Once you have made the world an end and faith a means, you have almost won your man, and it makes very little difference what kind of worldly end he's pursuing.
The institution of the church is a very interesting phrase. I remember someone saying, I think they were talking about marriage, who wants to live in an institution? But it does seem to me that the body of Christ, which is what the church is, that ingathering of those who have committed themselves to the Lord Jesus, that the church can indeed assist them to become what God calls them to be. At the same time, it is also possible for us to be, misled by the church into mere form, a kind of obsessive ritualism or hypocrisy. So there is a danger, it seems to me, on the part of a danger that is ever present for Christians of saying one thing and being another. And alas, we see that all too often.
The devils do not stop at the corruption of the young man's religion. Their evil plans include every facet of the man's existence, especially those things he enjoys, even though the young man's pleasures may be good and pure in and of themselves. The Bible plainly states that God alone is the giver of all good things. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote that every good and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights. This fact is a constant frustration to Screwtape. He acknowledges that while the lowerarchy has used pleasure to corrupt many souls, it is really a pure and healthy invention in its own right. Pleasure becomes sin only when it is corrupted, distorted, or forbidden. French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau claimed that everything that comes out of the hands of the Creator of all things is good, but everything degenerates in the hands of man.
He has filled his world full of pleasures. There are things for humans to do all day long without his minding in the least. Sleeping, washing, eating, drinking, making love, playing, praying, working. We fight under cruel disadvantage. Nothing is naturally on our side.
Screwtape and Wormwood strategize on ways to corrupt the pleasures of the young man's life. The patient makes friends with a couple he met at work, a worldly pair who are intelligent, wealthy, and skeptical. A couple whose value systems are in opposition to those of a Christian young man. Screwtape advises that this friendship should be encouraged, for it further divides the young man between his spiritual self that he exhibits at church and around other Christians, and his worldly self that takes over when he goes to work, makes friends, and lives outside the sacrosanct boundaries of the spiritual realm.
I would say that our everyday choices count, and that at each juncture we have the opportunity to listen to heaven or listen to hell, and each brings us that much closer to either destination. And what happens in Screwtape is that it's revealed that what we think may not be so momentous a choice really turn out to be life-changing.
The scriptures warn against this very thing.
Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. 1 John 2:15.
When the patient meets a girl, Screwtape vigorously explores and debates the nature of love. He tells us that love is neither good or bad, except for the tendency of that feeling to move a person closer to the enemy or nearer to the world below. Love can be corrupted by sexual temptation when the man is single, and by infidelity caused by the horror of the same old thing as the man tires of his wife after years of marriage. And what about love of a different nature? That of God for his creation. According to Screwtape, such love is not possible. All God's talk of love must be a ruse to cover his true intentions, though Screwtape can only guess what those are. The Apostle John writes that love comes from God, and that God is love.
Let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. He that loves not knows not God, for God is love. 1 John 4:7 and 8.
The taste of independence awakens, I think, a hunger for more independence. And at some point, Satan must have believed the lie that he could be independent of God and be joyful. And he pursued that. Screwtape and Wormwood, I think, are in the same deception. They've fallen prey. Screwtape and Wormwood have fallen prey to the same deception. And you see a desire to be independent of the Lord, independent of the truth. And ultimately what they've rejected is an unconditional love.
God's love is unconditional and sacrificial. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity that while our emotions change, God remains constant. His love for us endures our sins and indifference. And this love is quite relentless in its determination that we shall be cured of those sins, at whatever cost to us, at whatever cost to him. Satan's eternal punishment originates from his refusal to accept this unconditional love. Even Screwtape was forced to admit in one of the letters that if the fallen angels could ever grasp the truth of God's love, they would be able to re-enter heaven. Satan's, and consequently Screwtape's, approach is simple. They seek to destroy every pleasure and foster contempt in those places where love grows. In doing so, they turn us from loving, giving people to unhappy, selfish creatures. Can good truly overcome evil? We need only turn to the last of the letters. The situation is grim for Screwtape.
One moment it seemed to be all our world. The scream of bombs, the fall of houses, the stink and taste of high explosive on the lips and in the lungs. The feet burning with weariness, the heart cold with horrors, the brain reeling, the legs aching. Next moment, all this was gone. Gone like a bad dream. Never again to be of any account.
World War II was devastating in terms of loss of life and property, as well as the horrific emotional damage for those caught up in its ravages.
I think Lewis understood that at that moment in history, there's a great interest in sort of epic and cosmic struggles between good and evil. Of course, World War II made that very tangible and real for Britain and for many other European nations. Lewis, I think, capitalized on that interest at the time to try to use the war motif or the war backdrop for his letters. Of course, it's a war for the eternal state of the soul that Lewis is trying to dramatize in the Screwtape Letters, and that was a very tangible and understandable parallel that his culture could pick up on at that time.
While war might be a human invention, it can be used to bring about purposes of good and evil. The good is exhibited through virtuous actions of bravery and patriotism, and the evil dwells in those actions rooted in hatred, cowardice, and fear. Lewis believed that Satan enjoys the art of war when it brings out the worst in humanity, and that it is one more opportunity which can be used to bring us either closer to God or alienate us from him.
To talk about World War II, we have to step back and talk about Lewis's World War I experiences. He was wounded in France, went to a convalescent center, and eventually returned to Oxford, where he went to school. During his time in France, became even more embittered toward God, and the experience of many people who go to war is of wondering where God is, and how could he allow wars to happen. And Lewis went through that whole cycle of desperate searching. By World War II, Lewis had been through war. He had come to Christ, and he's much more a mature believer who understands that wars and rumors of wars are the condition of humankind, and is therefore equipped to address an audience that's world-weary and war ravaged. And that's what Mere Christianity is all about, taking that premise that his audience is empty of faith and somewhat hopeless, hoping against hope that God's still there, and he's able to say he is, and here's why.
This belief is echoed in one of the book's final letters. Screwtape laments that war brings a temporary entertainment to those engaged in the corruption of men's souls. But what does it finally accomplish if it does not deliver those souls to the Father below?
When I see the temporal suffering of humans who finally escape us, I feel as if I had been allowed to taste the first course of a rich banquet and then denied the rest. It is worse than not having tasted it at all.
Throughout the Screwtape Letters, we read about the struggle of the young man to avoid the temptations laid out for him by Screwtape and Wormwood. Now the young man is fully embroiled in the trappings of war, and the final struggle to secure his damnation begins. Centuries before Lewis, at the Council of Trent, one of the Church Fathers described this final battle for the soul. Even if our adversary seeks occasions throughout the whole of life, and goes about that he may devour our souls in any way he is able, there is no time at which he is more vehemently intent on using all the forces of his cunning to destroy us completely, and if possible to disturb our trust in the divine mercy, than when he sees the end of life approaching us. Perhaps Screwtape knows his apprentice is losing the spiritual battle, for he encourages Wormwood to keep the patient safe so that the apprentice tempter might have further opportunity to secure the young man's damnation. Screwtape plainly admonishes his nephew that there is no margin for error.
The justice of hell is purely realistic and concerned only with results. Bring us back food, or be food yourself.
So how can Wormwood keep from becoming fodder for Satan's banquet? By prolonging the death of his patient in the war. In the closing chapters of the Screwtape Letters, Lewis reveals that the adversity of our middle years wears on our souls and weakens our resolve. The shiny newness of youth loses its luster, love loses its intensity, the hopes and dreams of young adulthood crash and burn in the reality of practical living. Even the rhythm of life itself trades spontaneity for dull routine. These times are what Screwtape refers to as excellent campaigning weather for winning the soul. And if life takes a different turn and we achieve success, according to Lewis, as rationalized by Screwtape, that's even better. It leads to the self-satisfaction that comes with affluence and ease, and imbues us with a sense that this world offers everything we ever need. It supplants in the human mind the Bible's teaching that the riches and things of this world are corruptible.
Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust does corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth or rust does corrupt, and where thieves do not break through or steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Matthew 6:19-21.
This misguided prosperity is the desolation that the great English poet William Wordsworth wrote about in the first couplet of a famed sonnet. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. So does the young man escape eternal damnation? We learn his fate in the last letter, as Screwtape admonishes his apprentice for letting the patient's soul slip through his fingers. The young man dies in battle and transcends to the realm of heaven, where he receives the clarity of his true self in the light of God's presence. It is the enlightenment the Apostle Paul refers to when he wrote, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as I am known."
I think we do see it through a mirror darkly in this life. We simply cannot imagine what is next. We've tried to put images on it, and they're always inadequate. And so I do believe that we do see through a mirror darkly, an image that is distorted, veiled. One of Lewis's books was called Till We Have Faces, and in that he speaks of the way in which we are veiled, that we cannot see clearly. And I think that is true, certainly with the death experience. That undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. Except one.
Screwtape painfully acknowledges the transition from this world to the heavenly realm.
Just think what he felt at that moment. as if a scab had fallen from an old sore, as if he were emerging from a hideous shell-like tetter, as if he shuffled off for good in all a defiled, wet, clinging garment.
The story is over. Good has once again defeated evil. The justice of hell has been overthrown, the hunted has escaped, and the junior tempter returns to his uncle Screwtape without supplying the young man's soul, the feast for the table of his father below. So what does happen to Wormwood, the gullible apprentice devil?
As dainty a morsel as I ever grew fat on.
C.S. Lewis wrote over 40 books covering a variety of genres including theology, science fiction, children's literature and poetry. He died on November the 22nd, 1963, though his death was overshadowed by the news that a president had been shot in Dallas, Texas. Was the Screwtape Letters the literary vehicle by which Lewis explored his own demons and temptations? Not likely, though we'll never know for certain. What we do know is that Lewis knew the path to spiritual richness and the promise of an even better life to come. He wrote, "Once a man is united to God, how could he not live forever? Once a man is separated from God, what can he do but wither and die?"